Kellie Leitch is the Canadian Values candidate, but so far much of what we've seen and heard from her plan to screen new immigrants for Canadian values has been through the smears and attacks of her opponents at the CBC and the Liberal Party. So this weekend I caught up with Kellie Leitch to set the record straight on what she envisions for the screening process and how she plans to keep fighting back against the attacks from the politically correct crowd. Here it is.
So I'd like to get right into some of the misinformation that's out there about your campaign and what it is you exactly want to do to change the way we screen potential immigrants coming into this country. What is it that we don't do now that you would like to see Canadian immigration services do under a Kellie Leitch government?
I've been advocating a very common sense policy. And what I'm talking about is interviewing every immigrant, refugee, and visitor coming into Canada. Right now, only 1 in 10 immigrants to this country actually receive a face-to-face interview with a trained immigration officer. That means last year, of the 300,000 or more individuals that entered the country, about 270,000 never met a trained immigration officer. I want that to change. The Senate Standing Committee on Security and Defense has advocated a pilot project to interview everyone. What I'm recommending is we do that across the board and we meet every single immigrant, refugee, and visitor to Canada with a face-to-face interview.
Now, should you win the leadership and become the Prime Minister, do you think there would be a need for something that we're seeing down in the States, any sort of pause on travel while you figure out what we're going to do, or is it something that you can implement right away?
This is something we can implement right away, and my intention is to do that. We know that individuals right now are coming to Canada and put forward certain paperwork. What I'm suggesting is that we interview each one of them, and that in addition to interviewing each one of them, not only do we make sure they have knowledge of what we're talking about when it comes to Canadian values, but we actually ask them to agree with that.
Right, I think that's something that, there's actually widespread support for in this country, but unfortunately that hasn't stopped the sort of elites, as you like to call them, and the CBC certainly, from really attacking you, Kellie, and I think a lot of it is unfair, but I have to say that I think that should you win the race, it's only going to keep ramping up and getting worse. How are you prepared to deal with that? Are you willing to fight back the same way that Donald Trump has done in the United States, push back against the media a little bit for their unfair attacks?
Well, look, I'm happy to push back on the politically correct crowd, whether that be the CBC or the elites in other parts of the country. Let's be clear, 2/3 of Canadians agree with this position. The majority of Canadians are with me. Justin Trudeau likes to say that we're the fringe. He's the fringe. The majority of Canadians agree with this position, and I plan on making sure it's implemented.
Now, I think that a lot of the discussion around screening has to do with, immigrants who come from Islamic cultures. But in BC in particular, there is concern around immigration and the wealth and the amount of wealth that's coming into this city from places like China and around the world, where it's really having an effect on our real estate community. Is there some sort of screening or way of identifying immigrants that will come to Canada? And yeah, sure, they can bring some of their money, but they'll actually contribute to the economy, because that's one of the frustrating things I think that Vancouverites see right now, is that a lot of these people are coming here, they're buying real estate, and that's great for the real estate agent, but they're really not contributing to the economy as far as paying taxes and that sort of stuff. Is there something you would have in mind for helping Vancouver out with an issue that's tough like that one?
Well, look, what I've been talking about is screening for Canadian values, and that's what I'm talking about is a true Canadian identity of shared values, hard work, generosity, freedom, and tolerance. And that generosity starts at home. That's about investing in your local communities. That's what Canadians do every single day. And then we actually choose to invest abroad. And so when it comes to individuals coming to this country, I intend to have fulsome conversations with them. In fact, having our immigration department have those fulsome interviews with them so that each individual knows what those values are, but also agrees with them. And a big part of that is generosity here at home.
I totally agree with that, actually. Shifting gears a little bit, let's talk a few about things that are always the number one issue, it seems, in this country, the economy. What's the number one move to get this economy going? Because I'm only predicting that, we're going to be in a tough situation by 2019 if Justin Trudeau continues down this path of tax and spend. What's the number one thing that you would do right away as Prime Minister?
Well, what I've said is that I will cap government spending. We know that when we bring down that public expenditure, the private sector flourishes. Jobs are created in the private sector. Jobs like the ones my father and my brother create in their small businesses. That's what actually has our economy thrive. My focus is going to be making sure that that private sector can thrive by capping government spending, prioritizing government spending. I've also put forward a 6-point budgetary plan that talks about getting to a balanced budget, reducing the debt, and making sure the public service actually has salaries and benefits in line with the private sector.
Wow, you know, that is something that I think has been a huge issue for a long time, this discrepancy between public sector and private sector employment. How do you do that in a way that doesn't threaten the public sector livelihood? I actually think that was a mistake of the Ontario PC's last election to maybe suggest that they were going to remove people from the public service. How do you balance that where you still want to reach out to those people as potential voters?
I think the biggest thing is just being transparent on how you go about things and making sure you're having an open conversation and dialogue. I served as Minister of Labour. We had outstanding dialogue between union as well as the private sector employers. We always got to a deal. I'm proud to say I was a Labour Minister that never had back to work or strike legislation. We made sure the economy was functioning.
Just going to wait for that plane to pass.
That helicopter really likes you.
Last couple issues. We've heard Secretary Mattis make a demand for NATO countries to up their GDP proportion spending on defense. Is that something you're committed to getting to that 2% mark? And how do you see the current state of Canada's military and our equipment?
Well, for myself, that is a priority. I made the commitment out of the Quebec debate that I would meet the 2% commitment. The men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces, the veterans that we have in this country, they're the reason we have this open democracy, and they're the reason we have these Canadian values to defend. We have a core identity here in this country, a Canadian identity that these individuals have put their lives on the line to defend. I will make sure that they have the resources they need to continue that. Unlike Justin Trudeau, who thinks we have no core identity, unlike Justin Trudeau, who has cut billions of dollars out of the Canadian Armed Forces budget, they're a top priority for me, and I'll make sure they're supported.
Last one, Dr. Leitch, thank you very much for your time today. You've been very kind. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem in Israel, that's something you've talked about. It's something Donald Trump talks about. But I also think that to some people it seems like more of a symbolic gesture. Is it something that can actually be done? And even if Canada is the only nation to put their embassy, and I know that Costa Rica and El Salvador, I believe it was, recently moved it about 10 years ago. So there are no current embassies in Jerusalem. Can Canada be the only country, even if the U.S. won't do it, as some suspect they may not?
This can be done, and I will do it.
I've liked a lot of what Kellie Leitch has been saying for some time now, and even though what has defined her campaign has not necessarily been economic issues, I love the fact she's willing to make a hard cap on federal government spending. That's something the Tories never did even under Harper, as they simply cut the rate at which government was growing. There was no capping it. Leitch is also one of the frontrunners in the race, as according to a new Main Street poll out last week that surveyed only party members, she's in second place at 21% support, just behind Kevin O'Leary, who leads at 22%. Leitch may find it difficult, however, in the ranked ballot format of this leadership election. She is certainly the first choice of many members. But the question remains, will she pick up enough 2s, 3s, and 4s to ensure she ends up winning the race? Time will tell. For the Rebel.media, I'm Christopher Wilson. We're keeping a close eye on this Conservative leadership race, and to ensure you never miss a video, click subscribe on our YouTube channel.